Incremental routines. So basically here we're going to explain more or less how the algorithm works, the SM-18. Very, very high level explanation for babies or to a 5-year-old. So we already have done this in a very high level. Now we are doing the same, just using the jargon. That's it. We're not going to dig into details, the math involved, all of that. This will be in the mastery track, just in case you really want to understand how it works. It's like Wi-Fi, right? Okay, how does the Wi-Fi work? You don't know. I don't know. I only know how to use it. Okay, I need to connect this, I need to turn this on, pam, pam, pam. That's it. How the physics and engineering happens to create Wi-Fi, beyond me. So it's the same philosophy. So the scheduling algorithm in Supermemo, this is the 18, it's just a minor difference from the Supermemo 17 and SM-19. The algorithm is the different version of the release version. So now I'm using Supermemo 19 with SM-18. So when you have the dash is the version of the algorithm, not Supermemo release, if this makes sense. Then, how this works. Supermemo computes a starting interval, because in Supermemo, everything has an interval. You don't have new stuff like in Anki. So use the forgetting curve. The more information you have from the user, the better. Then, at the end of the interval, theoretically, ideally, you make the repetition. Could be the case that you do it after a while, it was outstanding for a few days, or you do cramming and you do it ahead of time. But let's simplify here. Then, just after the repetition, Supermemo will compute a new difficulty. Remember, the paradigm is a three-component model of long-term memory. Difficulty, retrievability, and stability. Nothing new. Nice. So computes new difficulty and look at the expression. Estimate, not computing. Estimates retrievability using the three sources of information and estimates the stability. It's just an educated guess, it's not a calculation. You don't know when you're going to forget, but I can approximate that by estimation. So using retrievability, how likely it is in percentage you're going to remember that. Stability, for how long you will remember that. So meaning if it's a month, any day on that month, you will be able to recall that memory in 90%, forgetting retention rate. And with this difficulty, retrievability, and stability, you compute the next optimum interval. Because you want to optimize, meaning optimizing, sending to the future as possible. Optimizing, meaning keeping the minimum number of repetitions without forgetting it. Or forgetting the stuff within some ratio called retention rate, or forgetting the index from what you want to forget. So if I put 95, which is the default in Supermemo, I will forget, but this forgetting is controlled. Then, Supermemo will update, behind the curtains, the memory matrices used for those computations. There are different matrices, you don't need to know what exactly, just to really know that this information will come later, because you go back to point 2, at the end of the interval, because you will do the next repetition, everything repeats. But the starting interval, that will be for future items, will use more data. If my collection now is brand new, I will use the default settings, which comes from a few expert users. But the more information there is for me, for the matrices, the better. The more optimized it is on my performance. Because these matrices is A, if you have already seen cards, flashcards or items, in this difficulty range and this stability range. So we know already how you behaved, how you performed with kind of a similar flashcard. So it becomes easier to predict, if this makes sense. And it's just looping this. The more information, the more granular, the more fine-tuned it can be. So if at the beginning the algorithm is overshooting, it's estimating a performance I cannot achieve, it will adapt as you collect data, as it collects data from you. So this is the only thing we're going to see in the fluency track. Just to let you know that not everything is available because it's proprietary, but there's plenty of data available. That's why FSRS now, it's the gold standard for open source algorithms because it has borrowed a lot from Supermemo's algorithm. That's all you need to know for now. Just trust the algorithm, and if now it doesn't work, just leave it some weeks or months if you're an outlier case, and it will get a lot more accurate. That's all for now. See you incrementally.